Today's daf we're going to be learning is Horayot daf. Hey, this is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started from the Mishnah at the bottom of Dalet Amud Bet. This is not a simple daf, I will warn you. What we're going to do in the Mishnah is basically see three different approaches, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Shimon, about the classic case of a par halem davar shel tzibor, or possible classic cases of a par halem davar shel tzibor. Then we're going to move to a Braita in the Gemara, which is going to bring some of the drashot in the background for this par halem davar shel tzibor korban, and then the different opinions about who's supposed to bring it and how many. And then we're going to delve further, the Gemara is going to delve further into the drashot that were mentioned in the Braita and expound upon them. Okay, that's the overall structure of at least the first part of the daf. So we're going to start from the Mishnah at the bottom of Dalet Amud Bet. Horu beitim v'asu kol hakalo ruban al pihem mivi'im par. So the Beit Din rules, and the majority of the community does, according to what the Beit Din says. We bring a par halem davar shel tzibur. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is look at the psukim for the par halem davar shel tzibur. So we look in Vayikra chapter 4, verses 13 to 21, where it says, if the majority, kol adat Yisrael, the majority of the community yishku, make a mistake, v'ne'elam davar me'nei hakal, and something was not seen to them, which we're going to see means the court made a mistake. And they did one of the mitzvot, they did it wrong, and they were guilty. We're going to darshan all this, that's why I'm reading it. And then it became known to them the sin that they mistakenly did. The kahal is to bring par ben bakar l'chatat. Okay, they have to bring a sin offering of a par. We're going to not read the rest right now, and now we're going to skip for a minute to another section in Bamidbar, which is another section of the Torah, which is in Bamidbar chapter 15, verses 22 to 26, where it seems to talk about something similar. But instead of bringing a par, they have to bring a par and a seir, okay, for a chatat offering. And it's introduced in a bit of a different way. If they make a mistake and they don't do all of the mitzvot, now the Gemara later, the commentaries say it can't be all the mitzvot. So they say it must be avodah zarah, which is like all the mitzvot. And then it says, from the eyes of the people it was done, bishkagai. I want you to note that also the other pasuk said me'enei, was ne'ela me'enei hakahal. Here it says, im me'enei ha'edah ne'asta l'shkaga. Okay, it was a mistake. Vasu kol ha'edah, then the whole edah has to bring a par ben bakar lo'olah, and then, sorry, it's not two chatats, the par ben bakar lo'olah, and a series of mechad l'chatat. Okay, there's two korbanot you have to bring. So that's what this Mishnah is going to reference. So basically, according to the first opinion, which we're going to see is Rabbi Meir, if the Beit Din taught something wrong, and then the nation, okay, this is the way they interpret the psukim, the mistake was made by the court, but then the people did like the court said, okay, either kolakal, all of the people, or rov, or ruban, al piyem. Maybe in par, they bring the par. If it was a mistake about idol worship, maybe in par v'seir, then they bring the par and the seir. Okay, that's what we saw before. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, 12 shvatim mevi'im 12 parim. Uba'avodah zarah mevi'im 12 parim u12 sivim. Yehuda has this seemingly radical approach. Even though the Torah said one par, well, it's one par for each tribe. Okay, where we get to start distributing the whole community up into tribes? Good question. We're going to talk about this. But Rabbi Yehuda has an approach that the whole nation is made up of tribes. It's interesting. Rabbi Meir didn't think there was this tribal approach at all, by the way. We didn't mention this, but one of the things we're going to see after is that who brings the par according to Rabbi Meir? It's the court is responsible for bringing the par. Who brings the par according to Rabbi Yehuda? The people. So the first difference is it the court or the people, which is a fascinating debate. Who's responsible? The Beit Din made the mistake. The people did it. So you could see that there's a pull as to who's responsible, because the court in the end didn't do the sin. It was the people that did the sin. On the other hand, it was based on a mistaken, erroneous ruling of the court. Now, of course, all of this is shkaga, and the korban is only meant to atone, but partly who needs the atonement and who does it, right? And who needs to pay for it. It's all a matter of money, who pays for the sacrifice. So according to Rabbi Meir, number one, it's the court that pays for it, and we view the whole nation as one, okay? Rabbi Yehuda says it's 12 tribes, okay? They have to bring it, no court. The court's not responsible. The court doesn't need atonement. It's the people that need atonement. They're in the end, the ones who made the mistake. The mistaken action, it wasn't their mistake, it was the court's mistake, but they did the action. They need the atonement for doing the sin. So they bring either 12 parim, if it was a regular mitzvah, or if it was avodah zarah, they bring 12 parim and 12 sirim. Rabbi Shimon, third opinion. This is the combo opinion. 13 parim ubavada zara, 13 parim u13 seirim. It says it's 13 for all of them, right? 13 for regular, 13 seirim and parim for avodah zara, right? The bull and the goat. The goat is the seir, the bull is the par. Par, now where does he get 13 from? Par v'seir l'chol shevet v'shevet, par v'seir l'beitin. He says it's both the people and the court have to bring. So what's the people? First of all, he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda about that people are broken up into tribes. Each tribe has to bring. Each tribe is responsible for their own people. So each tribe has to bring a par, and the court has to bring. Court's also responsible. So he makes everybody responsible. It's a very interesting debate about who, in the end, the responsibility is upon. Or again, I don't know if it's exactly responsibility because this is all a mistake, but the atonement. Who needs the atonement? I think it's all sort of connected. Now we have another case. That was if the whole community does it, meaning the majority of all the tribes, like the majority of all the people of all the tribes. What if Horubetin, they taught something wrong, the court, Vasu Shiv Ashvatim, or Ruban al Pihan, either 7 complete tribes or the majority of 7 tribes, which is the majority of the people, but 5 tribes didn't do anything. Mivi'im par, Ubava Dazara, Mivi'im par Vasir. Again, Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Meir says, well, it doesn't really matter if it's, as long as we get to majority, we're at majority. Who brings? The court brings. So it doesn't matter. That's all there is to talk about. It's one part, it's the same thing. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shiva Ashvatim Shechatu Mivi'im Shiva Parim. So he says, well, since everything's divided into tribes, well, only 7 sin, so only 7 bring. However, he adds one other thing. Ushar Shvatim Shalochatu Mivi'im Al Yedehem Pal. But the 5 who didn't sin, together they have to bring 1 par. So you end up with 8. Why? They're still responsible for the actions of the others. Since the majority of the people sinned, they have to bring an offering on behalf of them. It's like saying, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zebazeh, we're all responsible for each other. There's a level of responsibility, not the same as for the other tribes because they didn't do the action, but the 5 tribes together have to pay for 1 bull offering. So you end up with 8. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Shmona Parim, Ubavadah Zarah, Shmona Parim, Shmona Sirim. He agrees with number, but different how we get to this number 8. Par v'seir l'chol shevet v'shevet. Par v'seir lebeitin. He says we need par and seir for each tribe, or just a par if it's not a avodah zarah, and a par for the beitin, or seir, par and seir for the beitin. In other words, the beitin's responsible. Okay, so he basically requires, just like he said in the previous, he doesn't require the other 5 tribes to do anything. He doesn't have this concept that we're going to call greira, like the dragging in of the other tribes. But he does say there's 8 in the end because the court has to pay their part also. And they need their own atonement. Last case in the Mishnah. What if a court of 1 tribe, not the big court of all the tribes, but a court that was in charge of 1 tribe, the tribe's court makes a mistake, and that tribe did it. Now, if you already say tribes are like a kahal in and of themselves, then it sounds like they would have to bring. And in fact, we're going to see Rabbi Yehuda's position is, in that case, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't make all the other tribes responsible. But he does say that tribe brings a parlim davar shel tzibor, because that kahal is a tzibor, that tribe is a community. They have to bring. Chachamim omrim, no. If it's just the court that ruled, okay, the court for that tribe, only the teachings of the Beit Din haGadol. That's parhalim davar shel tzibur. Okay, this doesn't include the Beit Din of 1 tribe. Shneimar, how do we know? Because it says im kol adat Yisrael yishku. That's in Vayikra Dalet there. If all of the people, that has to be the court of, right? The lo adat oto shevet has to be adat Yisrael, not adat oto shevet, which means the court has to be the court of the whole, the Sanhedrin, the one in the Sanhedrin haGadol, like the big court. Only when they make a mistake is there a parlim davar shel tzibor. If it's an individual tribe's court, it's not. Okay. Now we're going to come back to all these opinions later. So the Breita is going to start off. I told you that we're going to bring a Breita, and from there we're going to get up into the 3 opinions. I just want to point out we have Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. Maybe I should do a quick review of them. Okay, Rabbi Meir thinks the court is responsible. They bring the par, and only there's 1 par. Rabbi Yehuda says all the tribes are responsible, right? Once it's the majority, he says the ones who sinned bring each one a par, and if the whole nation, then every single tribe brings a par, and the other ones who didn't sin have to bring one par together because they're also responsible. Rabbi Shimon says each tribe brings and the court brings, and if it's less than all of the tribes, each tribe that sin brings, the other ones don't have to do anything, but the court does have to bring also. Okay, that's the main debate. Now, then we had this other thing about the individual court. Okay, if there's a court of one tribe and how we view that, Rabbi Yehuda says there is a parlim davar shel tzibur, but just for that one tribe. There's no greira there of bringing the other tribes into this story. The other opinion says no, only when the Beit Din haGadol rules is there a parlim davar shel tzibur. Now, the Braita is going to start with something else relating from the Psukim here, but not really relating to our topics. But then the Braita is going to continue and bring drashot for the different opinions, but it's going to go not Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, but Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, and then go back to Rabbi Meir. Tana Rabbanan. Yad'u shehuru v'ta'u ma'huru. Okay, this is a bit of a strange case. The court knew they made a mistake. They ruled something wrong about, let's say, chelev. They said this isn't chelev, and it was chelev, and they ruled incorrectly. And the people ate chelev. And then the people ate something they thought was okay. They thought it was okay. They ate the chelev. It turns out it was chelev. They also ate blood. They thought it was okay, and they ate the blood. Now, they didn't remember, though. The people definitely sinned, and one of them was definitely a mistake of the court. But they don't remember anymore that the ruling that the court had ruled, that one of the ones they did on their own and one they did by the court. And they don't remember anyone which was which. And the court doesn't remember which was the one they taught that the people went against. So, went and did, okay? Which one was the one they taught mistakenly and what the people followed mistakenly. So but definitely the people followed a mistake in the court. We know that for a fact. We just don't know what. Well, you might think there's parallel davar shel tzibur. Talmud lomar. No, it says in the pasuk v'noda'a chatat that the sin has to be known. This sin isn't known. Lo sheyivad'u hachotin. The sin, and not that we know people sin, but no, we have to know what the sin was that the people did. So you're not responsible because in the end we can't identify which was the one that was done as a mistake of the court. Now we're going to continue to the next words in that pasuk. Note, achatat asher chatu, that they sinned. So chatu shnei shvatim mevi'im shnei parim. Chatu shlosha mevi'im shlosha. This is what we saw in the Mishnah. If two sin, they have to bring two pars. If three sin, they have to bring three. O eno omer ella. This is Rabbi Yehuda, by the way, who thinks each tribe brings right for their own. O eno ella chatu shnei yechidim mevi'im shnei parim. But wait, maybe it means asher chatu is plural. That's what they're saying. That's where they get this. It could be there's multiple parim if two tribes sin, but maybe it means two individuals sin. Maybe there's parlim davar shel tzibur if the Beit Din haGadol rules it correctly, and then one or two individuals sin, then maybe each of them individually has to bring a part. That's not the case, but the Braita is suggesting. How do we know it's not? Talmud lomar hakahal. Okay, by the way, they're not suggesting one. They're saying two or three people. Okay, you need at least a majority of some or multiple. Well, it says hakahal chayav. Okay, hakahal chayav. Only if the community does it. We're talking about big groups of people, not just individuals. Okay. V'kol kahal v'kahal chayav ketzad. How do you know each individual community is responsible? Meaning each tribe, as Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon said. So again, right now we're in Rabbi Yehuda in this Braita, but Rabbi Shimon agrees with this. Chatu, right? So first of all, they say, right? How do we know? Chatu. Sorry, I should read this better. Talmud lomar hakahal. The word hakahal teaches us two things. We're going to see in the end the word hakahal appears twice and actually teaches us four things. It teaches us two because hakahal is made up of kahal and hakahal. Hakahal is the, right? So there's the community that actually counts as two. So one, it teaches us that only when the community sins is it a problem, not if individuals. Number two, it teaches us that each individual tribe is viewed as a unit. Ketzad, how does this work? So we already know this, but the Braita is telling us this if we didn't know this. Chatu shnei shvatim mevi'im shnei parim. Chatu shiv'ah mevi'im shiv'ah. Ushash shvatim shelo chatu mevi'im al yidehem par, right? Two shvatim, then they bring two pars. If already it's seven in the majority, then each one brings seven parim. And the other shvatim shelo chatu, this is his din of what we call greira, have to bring al yidehem par. They have to bring a par on the behalf of the ones who sinned. Right? So the five who didn't sin have to bring a par. Shafilu elu shalochatu mevi'im al yidei achotim, as we saw before, even the ones who didn't sin have to bring. They're also responsible. L'chach nemar kahal l'chayev al kol kahal v'kahal divrei Rabbi Yehuda. And that's why it says kahal, to teach you each tribe is obligated. Okay, we're going to go back to this drasha later, as I said. First, we start with the Braita, which starts with drashot. Then the Gemara is going to expound and show even more drashot, how everybody gets to their complete opinion. But the Braita continues. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Shiv'a shvatim shechatu mevi'im shiva parim, ubeitim mevi'im al yedehem par. So now we want to know what's the drasha, that they bring the 7 and the court has to bring the 8th. Shenemar lamata kahal v'nemar lamala kahal. Well, in the first 2 psukim of this section of Paralim Davar Shel Tzibur, it says, first, ne'elam einei kahal, right? They didn't realize, meaning the court made a mistake. And then it says that the kahal is to bring the par. So they say, ne'emar lamata kahal v'nemar lamala kahal. It says kahal there and it says kahal there. Ma kahal amor lamala. Now, since the kahal in the first case, now who forgot, who made a mistake? Actually, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's the court and the people, because they all thought that it was permitted. So it's beitin with the kahal. Av kahal amor lamata. So when it says about bringing the sacrifice, and it uses the exact same word, who brings it, it must be beitin ima kahal. Okay, the beitin and the community. And that's why he got to, and when 7 sin, right, it's 7 plus 8. Or when all 12 sin, it's 12 plus 13, one of the court. Rabbi Meir, if you remember, says just the court brings. So where does he get it from? Similar to Rabbi Shimon, but a little bit different. Omer shiv'a shvatim shechatu beitin mevi'im al yedehem par v'hem pturim. So here it says explicitly that according to Rabbi Meir, it's the beitin that brings the par, and everyone else is exempt. Where does he get it? Well, the same kahal kahal. Ne'amar kahal lamata v'ne'amar kahal lamata. Again, lamata means the later pasuk and the earlier pasuk. The later pasuk is the bringing of the sacrifice. The first pasuk is of the mistake. Now, the minor difference between him and Rabbi Shimon is he just says who made the mistake, just the court alone, not the court with the tzibur. So, ma kala amor lamala beitin v'lo tzibur. There it's only the court and not the community. Av kala amor lamata beitin v'lo tzibur. Also, the kahal at the end, who brings the korban, is just the beitin, not the community. And that's how he only gets to one part. Now, I said the Braita was going to go through the 3 opinions and show drashot, just in a bit of a different order, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Meir, where they get it from the psukim. Now they're adding one more thing. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishmo. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says in the name of Rabbi Meir, he adds one other thing. Rabbi Meir says the court's responsible, and it's only if the majority of the people sin, right? If the majority of the people don't sin, there's no responsibility of Parliament Davar Shel Tzibur at all. It's only when the majority of the people sin. But now he adds, how do we determine majority? Majority in numbers of people or majority in tribes? Because remember, Rabbi Meir didn't really go by tribes. So he says, Chatushi shashvatim behem rubo shel kahal. He gives 2 scenarios and he says, no matter what, Rabbi Meir views each of these as majority. Either 6 tribes, which is only half, but in numbers, they're the majority of the people, or 7, even if they're not the majority of the people, you still have a majority of tribes, even if you don't have a majority of population, still you bring a par. Okay, so that's Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar in the name of Rabbi Meir. Now we're going to go back to expound on the Braita first. So now they're going to say Amar Mar. Now we're going back to the first halacha, which really didn't have to do with our topic as much. It wasn't related to these 3 opinions of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yehuda. But Amar Mar, Mantana. Who's the Tana who says you have to know exactly what sin you sinned? So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, Yitain Rava. Either Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rav or maybe Rava. Dilo ke Rabbi Eliezer. It's not like Rabbi Eliezer did not. And Rabbi Eliezer talks about a different case. Rabbi Eliezer talks about a case where a person ate a piece of meat, okay, fat of meat. Now, either the fat was chelev, which is forbidden fat, or the fat was notar. It was left over from a korban that was left beyond its time, which is also forbidden to eat. And the person accidentally ate it, and then doesn't know. He knows, let's say there were 2 pieces of meat. One was notar, one was chelev, and he's not sure which piece of meat he ate. So now, does he bring a sin offering for that? So Rabbi Shimon says, Rabbi Eliezer says, of course, because manavshach. Im chelev achal chayav, notar achal chayav. That's one piece was notar, one piece was chelev. He ate one of them. So we don't know which one he ate, but it doesn't matter. Either which one he ate, he did something wrong. And again, this is all accidental. He didn't realize. So now that he realizes, he has to bring a sacrifice. Okay? That's Rabbi Eliezer. Now that obviously doesn't match because now this is individual, but we're assuming what's true for individual is true for the communal offering also, the communal sin offering, right? One is individual sin offering and communal sin offering. If in the individual sin offering, you don't have to know exactly what your sin was, because in the end, he doesn't know whether it was the notar or the chaylev. He just knows it was one of them. He's obligated. Well, then also in the case of the parlim davar shel tzibur, you have to know, right? You don't have to know. And we just said you have to know. So it must be not Rabbi Eliezer. Rav Ashi disagrees and says, Rashi Amar Afilu Tema Rabbi Eliezer. I can explain this line in the Mishnah, also this line in the Braita, also according to Rabbi Eliezer. Why? Shani hacha dichtiv asher chatu aleh, because there's a special drasha by us. It says, Noda'a chatat asher chatu aleh. They knew the sin that they sinned. It specifically says you have to know the sin you sinned. It doesn't say that by the individual offering, which the Gemara says, of course it does. Hatamnami aktiv asher chataba. In other words, they're trying to make this distinction. Maybe it's only true for communal, not for individual, because of the pasuk. But also by there it says asher chataba, that the person sinned. You say, no. There, that use is coming to exclude something else. And therefore, it's not coming to exclude this. And therefore, you actually could explain that our Mishnah could fit with Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer might say that by individual, but doesn't say it by communal. Why? What is a Asher Chataba coming to exclude there? That you sinned, meaning you did an action you didn't know was forbidden, but you knew you were doing the action. You knew you were eating the chaylev. You were eating this piece of meat, this piece of fat. You didn't know it was chaylev, but you were notar, but you did know you were eating something you were intending to eat. What if I didn't even intend to eat and somehow it gets swallowed by me, but without me even intending to do any sort of action? Then I won't be obligated. That's what a Asher Chataba comes, and therefore it doesn't come for this. Now comes the Gemara. The Gemara wants to say, my time of Rabbi Yehuda. Where does Rabbi Yehuda get off on his whole approach? And we're going to basically repeat some things that were said in the Braita and expand a little more. All the opinions of Rabbi Yehuda are based on these 4 words, hakahal. Now, they're really only 2, but because each word has the hea yediyah, the definite principle, so it's the kahal that comes out to 4. That's going to give him room for 4 drashot. So, k'tive, hakahal, kahal. Right? That's the 2. They made a mistake, the kahal, and then the kahal brings the sacrifice. One is to say each tribe is viewed independently. Each one has to bring a par, even though, again, the simple reading of the Mishnah was not that. One is to teach you that the Beit-Din has to make the mistake in teaching something wrong, but the people in the end are the ones who do the action. In other words, the action has to be done by the people. That's why it says kahal, people. One is the kahal is responsible, even if they didn't do the sin. The other 5 have to bring a par by themselves. And one is coming to teach you that a tribe, the last halacha in our Mishnah, if a tribe did according to their court, they themselves are one considered an independent kahal, and they'll have to bring, even though the others don't. That's what we learned for the 4 kahals, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Just to remind you again, going back to the beginning. Basically, Rabbi Yehuda is putting all the responsibility on the community, none on the court at all, in terms of the atonement, none of the atonements on the court, and viewing tribes as independent to the end, okay? Each tribe is its own independent unit to the extent that you can even obligate a tribe that follows their own court by themselves. And he has this idea of if the majority of the people sin, well, then the rest of the community has to also be responsible. Rabbi Shimon, where does Rabbi Shimon get this? His opinion. Tlata kaliktive. He only learns 3 kahal. Why? Because 1 is needed for itself. We're going to see that right now. Hakahal, kahal. Me'enei kahal orche dikrahu. Well, it has to say it was, right, it was ne'elam me'enei kahal. They didn't know. The people didn't know. Well, you have to say it. Like people say, me'enei deplanya. Right? From the eyes of someone. They have to use that word there. That's necessary. So it's not open for drasha. So there's only 3 open for drasha. So what are the 3? Well, Rabbi Shimon, if you remember, holds 13, right? Let's say the whole nation, 13, 12, and then 1 of the court. So he does differentiate people into tribes, like Rabbi Yehuda. That's the only drasha he's going to have, like Rabbi Yehuda. Utreach Rine, what are the other 2 for? We already saw this. The kahal, remember, comparing. Nemar lamata kahalu, nemar lamala kahal. The korban, the kahal brings. The mistake was the kahal. Mala halam beitin makal. The mistake was the court with the people. They all made the mistake. Afkan beitin makal. So the korban is the court and the people. That's his opinion. Now notice, so I just want to clarify here. What doesn't he have of Rabbi Yehuda? Well, he doesn't have Greira. Okay, that was one of his. He doesn't have the Shevet that does like the court, because he doesn't believe that. There's only one that he doesn't have of Rabbi Yehuda that he actually does hold by, and the Gemara is going to come back to this later and say, where does he get it from? And we're going to do the same thing, by the way, for Rabbi Meir, which is the Maaseh is based on the Kahal, even though the teaching is done by the court, but the action is done by the community. Okay, we're going to have to figure out where he gets that from because he doesn't have an extra Kahal to darsh. Rabbi Meir, what about Rabbi Meir? Rabbi Meir, Kahala Kahalo Darish. He doesn't have any drasha Kahala Kahal, so he doesn't think there's 4. He thinks there's 2. Hilkach Trey Kaliktive, so there's only 2 Kal. Mebaile, now we know already, Ne'amar Lamata Kal, Ne'amar Lamala Kal, right? Again, the 2 Kal comparisons, but he just says it differently than Rabbi Shimon. Mala Alam Beitin Below Tzibor, Avkan Beitin Below Tzibor. One is only the Beitin, which is the mistake is only the courts, and therefore the Korban is brought only by the court. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, we're going to do one last thing here, which is what about Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says about this majority of the people, or minority of the people, but majority of the tribes? Rabbi Meir will be Machayev. My time, where does he get this from? Ktiva haya me'enei ha'ida. It says, if me'enei ha'ida, alma mi'uta, dechtiv me'enei. Whenever it says from, it means not from everybody, but from some. Uktiv kilachol ha'am b'shgaga. And it says, these are all, by the way, in Sefer Bamidbar, these psukim. It says, it's a very famous pasuk, as we say it in Kol Nidre. V'nislach lechol adap b'nei Yisrael ki lechol ha'am b'shgaga. Okay, and we forgive all the people, right? Because the whole nation sinned, okay, by accidentally. So it says me'enei and it says kilachol am b'shkaga lemeimor deruba imi utalo. So now we have a bit of a tricky part because me'enei akal means not everybody, but then it says lechol am b'shkaga as if everybody sinned. So how does that work, right? It sounds like from that pasuk only the majority or everyone and not minority. Well, hakitzad. So one seems to say even if it's some of and not all of. The other one says only all of. So how do you work those two together? That's where he gets both parts. Me'enei means even if it's the minority, but it's the majority by people. And even if it's 7, but it's the minority of people, but it's majority of tribes, and that's how we get both. Now we go back to something I said. We're now starting in Amud Bet. We go back to something I mentioned before, which is Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon don't have the word hakahal there for the drasha that Rabbi Yehuda used it for, that the kahal in the end is the one who does it. Because it says there, right, ta'asena, kahal, ta'asena, I forget exactly the words. Let me just get you the words. It says, sorry. Okay. It says, Vasumika v'ne'elam, sorry. Im kol adap b'nei Yisrael yishku, v'ne'elam davar meinei kahal v'asu. Okay, it says the kahal and v'asu, and they did it. Okay, so now it's the kahal that has to do it, even though the court is the one that made the mistake. So Rabbi Yehuda got that from one of the mentions of kahal. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Meir, but where do they get that? The mistake was made by the court, but the action has to be done by the people. Abaye, we're going to have Abaye and Rabbi each bring different psukim, and then we're going to say, actually, why do we need both psukim? It's actually the psukim we just quoted. Okay, and what does it say here? Again, these are the psukim by the Avodah Zarah mistake. But me'enei ha'edah ne'asta l'shkaga. Okay, from there you see, what do you see? It's me'enei ha'edah, from the eyes of the community, ne'esta, it was done. There, the edah appears right next to the asiyah. Rava amar ki l'chol ha'am b'shkaga, because the whole nation sinned. The whole nation would mean who sinned? They must have done the action. Utsricha. Now, why do you need both psukim? And now we go back to before what we just did with these 2 psukim. One sounds like minority, and one sounds like all of them, which majority. So tzricha. I would have thought maybe even if the minority of the people sin then, because even me'ene from some of the people, not necessarily all or a majority. That's why you need the pasuk. All the people sin, because it has to teach you majority. But if you said l'chol ha'am, you might have thought the whole nation includes not only the people, also the court. So maybe you're only going to be obligated when the court also sins. So they say, so therefore it says, no, you need both psukim to teach you. It's the majority of the people, and it doesn't need to include the court. And that's where Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Meir get this from, that in the end, the action has to be done by the people, not the court. But then the Gemara asks, but wait, you're proving parlim davar shel tzibur from the par of the avodah zarah. So, well, how can you learn from there the regular parlim davar shel tzibur? Yalfina me'ene me'ene. And as I mentioned before, that both say the words me'ene, so you can make a gzera shava. What's true for one is true for the other. Now we're going to the last part of the Mishnah, which is Horu Beitin Shel Echad. And now we're going to ask the same question of Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, but it actually means something different for each one, and you'll see right now. So first we're going to ask a question of Rabbi Yehuda. Ibayelu. Shevet Echad Rabbi Yehuda B'Horayot Beitin haGadol Mimai Teshar Shvatim Olo. If you remember, what does Rabbi Yehuda say in the Mishnah? One Shevet goes by what their court said, right? So a court of one tribe, that tribe follows. They have to bring, but none of the other Shvatim have to bring. Just they have to bring. What if the court, Beit Din haGadol, the Sanhedrin haGadol rules, but only one tribe follows their mistaken ruling? So do the other tribes have to bring also because it was the court, the big court that did it? Maybe the other tribes also have to atone. Remember the Greira issue, that you're all responsible. Or are they only responsible when there's a majority? So mi amrinan, shiva shvatim u'demai teshar shvatim. Do we say it's only once the majority, 7 tribes, then we make the other 5 pay? But mishum di karuba, because there's a majority, and then when there's a majority issue, so then we make everyone pay. Abachad shevet delay karuba lo. But if it's only one tribe who did it, maybe no. Odilma loshnar, maybe it doesn't matter because in the end it was the court that sinned, and maybe they made the mistake, and then the only one tribe sinned, but maybe everyone's responsible for that. What we're going to do here is we're going to bring, and it's going to be the exact same structure for Rabbi Shimon. We're going to bring 2 sources to try to get an answer. The first source, it's going to be a little complicated till we try to get to an answer, and then we're going to actually reject it. And then we'll have a second source that actually gives a very clear answer. Tashma. Now, the reason why this source is complicated is because there's a bunch of things missing. Mahe Mivim. It says, what do they bring? What sacrifice do they bring? Now, we have no idea what case they're talking about. So we're going to have to try to say this is talking about our case. And then we're going to say, oh, maybe it's talking about something completely different because it's totally doesn't say what it's talking about. And then it doesn't say who says the first opinion. And we're going to have to prove that that's Rabbi Yehuda. Otherwise, this doesn't help us at all. So what do they bring? Par echad, 1 par. Rabbi Shimon omer shnei parim. Rabbi Shimon says 2 parim. So now we have to find a case where Rabbi Shimon would say 2 parim and someone else would say 1 par. So b'mayas kina, what's the case? If 7 tribes sinned, that definitely can't be because Rabbi Shimon timnayabai. Because if 7 sin, what's Rabbi Shimon's approach? Each tribe plus the court. That would be 8. Wouldn't say 2. So first we're just trying to prove what's the topic. So it must be 1 tribe. And b'mai, what would be the issue? Well, if it's Bahora'at Beit Dino, Rabbi Shimon lately. Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold. Rabbi Yehuda is the only one who holds if their own court ruled, right? The tribe's court ruled and the tribe made a mistake. Only Rabbi Yehuda thinks you're obligated. So Rabbi Shimon wouldn't say you bring 2 parim. So it must be, it must be the Beit Din haGadol ruled, and it must be that Rabbi Shimon holds that if the Beit Din haGadol, which by the way is Chachamim in the Mishnah, who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda there and say only when the Beit Din haGadol rules are they obligated. And then Rabbi Shimon would fit perfectly because what would you say? Horayot Beit Din haGadol, Rabbi Shimon says, assuming that Rabbi Shimon says this, you would bring a par for the tribe that sinned, and the Beit Din would have to bring a par, okay? Because it was the big court who ruled mistakenly. But okay, so that would then say that's our topic then. That's what we're looking for. Now, we have to prove then that Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says par echad, and then we'd have our answer. That when the Beit Din, the big court rules and only 1 tribe follows, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't require anyone else to have to bring a par in that case because look, he says only 1 par. Now, how do we know this is Rabbi Yehuda? Well, Tanakama mane. Inema Rabbi Meir harubabai. Rabbi Meir doesn't obligate when 1 tribe does it. Rabbi Meir is very clear. It's the Beit Din that's responsible, and only when the majority of the people do it. Not the majority of the people, no. Elalav Rabbi Yehuda. It must be Rabbi Yehuda. And 1 tribe sinned. Okay? And then that's perfect. Because we said already the topic is 1 tribe sin. This must be Rabbi Yehuda by process of elimination. And therefore he says parachah, which means the other shvatim don't have to in that case. So the Beit Din haGadol makes a mistake. 1 tribe follows it. Only that 1 tribe, just like when their own court ruled. Okay, now no one else thinks you're obligated at all if 1 court ruled, but he thinks you're 1 court ruled, you are responsible, and only 1 par, the rest of the people aren't responsible. But the Gemara says, no, that's not necessarily the case because Amre, they say, Hacha b'mayaskina, what's the case of this Braita? Kegon shechatu shisha shvatim v'hem ruban shakav, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. This Braita is talking about something else entirely. It's talking about Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and Rabbi Meir, if you remember. What did he say? If it's the majority, but it's missing, right? It's six tribes, but not the majority of, but it is majority of population. Or it's seven tribes, but it is not the majority of the population. So in that case, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is the one who says you only bring one par because remember, he said in the name of Rabbi Meir, you're going to bring one par in that case just as well. It's the same as majority. And Rabbi Shimon, you'd have to say in that case will hold, well, since you don't have the majority of the people, you're actually going to bring only two. One for the people, right, for the people who sinned, and one for the court. Tanya, as we saw in the Braita, Rabbi Shimon, quoting the Braita we saw before, and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Meir Shmuel, says in the name of Rabbi Meir, Chatu Shisha ve'hem Rubosh Kal, O Shiva Pisha Ein Rubosh Kal Mevi'im Par. And then Tanakam is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and the topic has nothing to do with our topic, and it has nothing to do with Rabbi Yehuda, so we reject that. But second source is going to be very clear that's going to answer our question again. If the Beit Din haGadol rules and one tribe follows, do the other tribes have to also bring a par together? The other 11 tribes together pitch in to bring one par? Well, we're actually going to see yes. We tried to prove no from the first source, but we rejected that. Here it says explicitly, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shevet Sha'asa B'Hora'at Beit Dino. This is explicitly the case. A Shevet who follows the Hora'ah of the court, the big court, their own court. Only that tribe brings, and the other tribes are exempt. But but if the big court rule, the big Sanhedrin, sits in the Lishkat Gazid in the Beit HaMikdash, even the other tribes have to bring, and there you see, that's the answer. Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi is going to say, Maniti Namidaik, and you can actually infer this from our Mishnah as well. Because look at the wording of our Mishnah. Asauto Shevet Dekatani. It says in our Mishnah, Asauto Shevet al Pihen, Oto Shevet Chayavu Shar Kol Shvatim Turim. It says, if the tribe did like their court, that tribe is obligated, and all the others are exempt. Now, Lama that's an unnecessary phrase. Why do you have to say, and all the other tribes are exempt? If you said, Hatane Oto Sheva Chayav, that tribe is obligated. Doesn't it mean, obviously, Mimele Yadana, I would already know then, Shar Shvatim Turim, all the other tribes are exempt. So why did they add that? Ela HaKamashma, it's to teach you that specifically in the case they spoke about, Shar Shvatim Turim. So, Hora'at Beit Din, Hu de Shar Shvatim Turim. When their own court ruled, then the other tribes are exempt because their courts had nothing to do with this. Aval B'Hora'at Beit Din HaGadol, when the big court ruled, Afilu Shar Shvatim, Hayavim Shmamina. So then you can infer that even the other tribes are obligated as well. That's why it added those extra words. So he's just supporting the answer to the question. Now we're going to have the same question according to Rabbi Shimon, but it actually has a bit of a different meaning. Because he ba'elehu shevet echad shasa ba'orat beit din hagadol Rabbi Shimon mimai te'olo. And what if one tribe did horat beit din hagadol? Would Rabbi Shimon say you have to bring or not? Now, what's our question here? Our question is, according to Rabbi Shimon, we already said that according to Rabbi Shimon, right, all the individuals are considered like a kila, but not to the extent that he doesn't think that if one court ruled and that tribe did it, that you'd have to bring. The question is, does he think there's a parlim davar shel tzibur, though, if one tribe does something, because he does think one tribe is a kahal, when the Beit Din haGadol rules. So it's the same wording of the question, but it actually means something very different, because when we asked according to Rabbi Yehuda, it was one thing, and we asked according to Rabbi Shimon, it means something else. So let's see. So we're going to do the exact same thing, which is Tashma. Let's prove it from that source, which we're going to go just like the previous, where first we think it's Rabbi Shimon and it's our topic. Right? We know it's Rabbi Shimon, actually, because Rabbi Shimon appears there. And then we have an answer if we can prove that this topic of this Braita is our topic, then we can get an answer what Rabbi Shimon holds. But then we're going to reject it and say, no, that's not the topic of the Braita at all, just like we did in the previous section. So Tashma, Mahi Mivim, what did they bring? And again, we're missing the subject here. Parachad, according to Tanakama, Rabbi Shimon Omer Shnei Parim. So b'mayas kina, what's the case? Ilay meshachatu shiva, if you say 7 tribes sin, Shnei Parim, it wouldn't be 2 parim, it would be Shmona Parim by. This is word for word what we just said. According to Rabbi Shimon, it would be 8, because that's Rabbi Shimon's opinion. 7 tribes, right? 7 bring, and the 8th is by the court. Ela dechata shevet echad, well, it must be then 1 tribe sinned. Ubemai, then what? And then again, that tribe would bring, and the court would bring. And b'mai, what's the case? No, if it's their own court rules, where Rabbi Shimon Lele, only Rabbi Yehuda thinks you bring a korban in that case. Ela b'hora beitin haGadol, it must be hora beitin haGadol. What do you see Rabbi Shimon holds? 2. So there's your answer. Yes, you would have a parlim davar shel tzibur in that case. But again, they're going to say b'tizbera Tanakama mani. You can't explain it that way because then who's Tanakama? Rabbi Meir harubabai. Rabbi Meir doesn't require anything in this case, so it's not Rabbi Meir because he needs the majority of the community to be doing, and you don't have that. Rabbi Yehuda shashvatim nami. If it's Rabbi Yehuda, all the other tribes would have to bring also. You'd have 2. You'd have 1 by the tribe that sinned, 1 by all the rest of the tribes, because we just have the bright that says that Rabbi Yehuda holds that way. Elahamane. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, he uchiditanya. It must be Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. It must be the topic is not what we thought it was and has nothing to do with our issue. Second source, which here we'll get to an answer, Tashma, Rabbi Chachamim omrim la'olam eno chayav ela halorat b'din haGadol. You're never chayav, right? This is our Mishnah. You're only going to be chayav if the hora'ah of the Beit Din haGadol comes and says it. And then you'll be chayav even if one tribe follows. So among Chachamim, who's the author of Chachamim? Ilema Rabbi Meir, it can't be Rabbi Meir because Rubabai, he doesn't think if one tribe sins, there's a parlim davar shel tzibur. He only thinks when the majority. Elalav Rabbi Shimon hishma minaso. It must be by default, process of elimination. It must be Rabbi Shimon, and there's your answer. He does obligate a parlim davar shel tzibur, and again it will be 2 because 1 for the tribe that did it and 1 for the court. Okay, that was the hard part of today's daf. Now we're going to finish up with easier stuff. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, Shevet Echad Ikrei Kahal Manal. Where do Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, who basically say that each tribe is viewed as individuals, as opposed to Rabbi Meir, who said, no, the whole Kahal is one Kahal, and we don't have this division into tribes. But they say each tribe is like a Kahal. Where do they get that from? Amrei. So the first proof, which we're going to reject, is from Divrei HaYamim Chronicles, Dichtiv Vayamod Yoshafat Kahal Yehuda v'Yerushalayim, Bebeit Hashem Lefnei HaChatzer HaChadasha. So Yoshafat was standing, in the Kahal of Yehuda and Yerushalayim. Now, that was the tribe of Judah. That's one tribe, and it calls it Kahal. Now they're just a parenthetical, which is, what does it mean? Chadasha. What's Chadasha about it? Well, Amar Rabbi Yochanan shechashu dvarim v'amru tful yom al yikanes b'machaneh leviyah. Someone who goes to the mikveh in the morning, but has to wait till sunset, till the 3 stars come out, until they become pure, they can't go into what's called the Machaneh Leviyah, which is not the Azara, but outside the Ezrat Nashim area and the other Azarot that are in that area, outside the big Azara. Normally, according to Torah law, Tful Yom could go into the Machaneh Leviyah, just not into the Azara, the Machaneh Shechina. But in Yehoshavat's time, they did this chidush, and that's why it said Chadashah there, because they said a Tful Yom can't go in there. Okay, that's a total side thing. We're not going to spend time on that. But how can you prove from the Yehuda and Yerushalayim that Kahal is one tribe? Because Jerusalem included the tribe of Benjamin as well. So that's 2 tribes. And that you could call Kahal, but it doesn't prove one tribe is called the Kahal. This is when Yaakov when he goes to give the bracha to Yosef's sons, he says, gives this, God told me when I left Padan Aram, which we're going to see is right after Binyamin was born. Okay, I'm going to give you a lot of children, and you will become a kahal ami. That's what he said just before Binyamin was born. And who was born then after he was promised to have a kahal of kahal? Binyamin. Proofs from here. What did God say? You're now going to give birth to another whole community of people. That means a tribe is a community. But Amalei Rav Shava Rav Kahana, no, maybe what God was saying was, once Binyamin is born, you'll have your full kahal, 12 tribes, and that's a kahal. Doesn't mean one tribe is a kahal. Amalei, so to which Rav Kahana answers him, what, 11 children is not enough to be called a kahal? 11 tribes would be a kahal also. What's the difference between 11 and 12? It's not like the 12 puts him over the edge. That calls it a kahal, which means really Binyamin is called kahal, and that's where they get it from that pasuk. It's Breshit, chapter 48. That's where we learn the kahal is a tribe. Okay, we'll end with this next sugya, which really starts a whole new sugya, which you won't see the connection yet. We'll see it in tomorrow's daf. But Tanya Rabbi Shimon, they bring a bride to where Rabbi Shimon says, This is in the section in Bamidbar chapter 8, totally not connected right now, where the Levites have to do a purification process before they take on their jobs as Levites. And it says they have to bring a second par as a sin offering. Now, in the Lamed Shem Shnaim, if the whole thing is to teach you the second one, because there's a first one, meaning you have to bring two. Haluk Far Ne'amar, now it's said actually later, but still it's said in a different pasuk, you have to bring one sin offering, one burnt offering, so it's pretty clear they have to bring two. It wouldn't need to say the second part. So, Ella, so why does it say the second? Well, you might have thought they could eat the chatat meat, right? Kohanim get to eat the chatat, the meat of the chatat. Maybe the Levites could eat the meat of the chatat. Talmud lomar upar sheni. What does it mean? The second par, sheni la'olah, second to the olah, to the burnt offering. Ma'olah lo ne'echelet, and since the olah isn't eaten, av chatat lo ne'echelet. Also, the sin offering isn't eaten. Okay, why this is connected, we'll see in tomorrow's daf, as I said. Okay, now we're going to go back and do a quick review of our complicated daf. So we started with these three opinions of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. Who brings the par? How many parim are brought? And right, and who's kind of the responsibility upon, and who needs the atonement? Is it the people? Is it the community? Is it both? I'm sorry, the people, the court, the both, right? We learned, everyone agrees that it's the Beit Din that makes the mistake and the people that do the action, but we saw they each learned it a bit from different places. And then we brought the Baraita, which kind of expounded on them and showed some of the sources in the text. And then the rabbis, kind of the Gemara, expounded on that and showed really the exact drashot of everybody and how they darshan these words, kahal, hakahal, hakahal, how many drashot they think are in there and how they darshan them and how they each got to their different opinions. Then we moved to the second part of the Mishnah, which was really about one Beit Din and one, right, the Beit Din of one tribe and the one tribe sins. What's the halacha there? And kind of filling in the blanks what the Mishnah didn't discuss, right? Which is what does Rabbi Yehuda think if the Beit Din ruled and only one court followed? Do the others, other tribes also have to chip in? And and I forgot to mention in the big debate between them, only Rabbi Yehuda thinks the tribes that didn't sin actually also have to pitch in. Right? There was another issue there in the Machloket that Kol Yisrael Revin, everyone's responsible, but not everybody held that way, and they called it Greira in the Gemara. And then we had the question of Rabbi Shimon, what does he say if the Beit Din rules? And then he says, yes, you also have to bring a parlin davar shel tzibur, even though Rabbi Meir thinks you don't. Right? Again, another issue of machloket between them. We basically prove that Rabbi Shimon holds the rabbis is right. The rabbis in the Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon, and a few other issues. Where do we get that each tribe is a kahal in and of itself? And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.